Welcome to the Friday vlog.
Welcome to the Friday vlog.
And today we thought we would talk about having space for our partner's feelings of upset.
Very important.
And I think we probably all would agree that it's a good idea to have compassion and empathy for our partner when they're feeling upset, but it can be much harder to do in practice.
It can be much harder to do in practice.
And we had a very small incident this weekend, which also helped us both have some insight around that.
Yeah, no, I had quite a good insight. And I think that quite often I find that when I'm working with clients and then I find myself pointing in a specific direction, I might have to, I find myself in a situation where I'm having to walk the walk. And so a couple of instances lately where there's been a great opportunity to coach a client and to sort of espouse the value of giving one's partner some space to feel their feelings. And lo and behold, at the weekend, there was that opportunity for me. And I think in the past, I probably had some very strong programming around not accepting your feelings, particularly in a certain situation. And that certain situation popped up this weekend. Would you like to share what that certain situation was?
It's a very silly situation. I'm kind of embarrassed. But we're watching a series and we ended up watching the wrong episode. So we jumped ahead an episode and missed an entire episode. And I felt disappointed about that.
It was my fault.
Well, anyway, I felt disappointed.
Well, yeah, so yes, and it was my fault. I think ultimately it was my fault, although I think you did play somewhat of a role, but I'll take responsibility.
I wasn't pointing any fingers.
So anyway, we basically watched this TV show in the wrong sequence. So we didn't realize how far out of sequence we were until we realized that one of the characters had completely disappeared without rhyme or reason, and the character had basically died in the previous show. So Rohini was quite upset by this, and I could understand to a point that she would be upset by this, but in my mind she started to go on about it, and I didn't think she would ever let it go. And there used to be this British comedian, well, he used to be, he's still around, but this guy, his name's Bob Morter, and he had this TV show, and one of his catchphrases would be, "She wouldn't let it lie, it wouldn't let it lie." And that's kind of like how I felt watching you or listening to you going on and on and on about the fact that it was out of sequence. And then I had this moment of awareness where I realized it's like, here's one of those opportunities for me to give my partner some space to have their feelings. And when I actually put myself in your shoes on that level, I could suddenly see, it's almost like everything fell into place. Because when Rohini watches a TV show, she doesn't like me to talk at all. She likes stony silence. She likes to get fully engrossed in the show. And I realized that that's just kind of like something that I would have a lot of judgment in the past about. It's like, wow, she's so intense. But it's in the same way that she might pick up a novel and not want to put it down. She just gets so sucked into the plot and the storyline that for her that's just pure enjoyment. For me, it's like, wow, that's too intense. It's too intense for me.
And you also like to tell me what's going to happen, and I don't like that.
Oh yeah, I do like to say what's going to happen, but I've learned my lesson on that front. But anyway, in that moment, I thought, well, here's one of those opportunities to really put myself in her shoes, but give her the space. In fact, actually, the thought of giving you the space really kind of suggested to me, or reminded me, it would be valuable to put myself in your shoes. And then I realized and looked at our entire marriage of televisual entertainment and realized it's like, yeah, that's that thing about Rohini where she likes to really get into the storyline, and that's just who she is. And I used to just judge that as just like, I don't know, I used to get irritated by the fact that I couldn't speak up, but I couldn't. If that had happened, I think that's happened before. It's not the first time. It's not my first rodeo. Like watching a show in the wrong sequence. I think I've got upset by the level of your intensity around it. And this time I didn't. This time I kind of like, oh, give her some space. And then in giving you some space, I found myself putting myself in your shoes. I had some empathy. And then empathy for me is the sort of gateway to compassion. And then I felt compassionate. And then we were good. Because compassion is always the secret sauce, right?
Absolutely. And we know it's a silly example. You're getting to hear some of my foibles. And we have also learned in the talking, now I pause it if you want to say something. So I don't have to try and watch and listen. I just pause it and then you say whatever you say. So Angus doesn't have to sit in stony silence. But I don't like it when he tells me what's going to happen. That's one thing I don't like.
That's true.
So
sometimes I might pause it and I might say, can I tell you what I think is going to happen now?
Yes.
More often than not, you say no.
Usually. He's always right, too, which is something that, I don't know how, you should be a screenwriter or something. But anyway, we know it's a silly example, but it actually was really impactful because there's been a few times where I've said, how come you're allowed to have feelings of upset over ridiculous things and I'm not allowed to have feelings of upset over ridiculous things? And so it's just realizing that when we're looking at someone else, it can really look trivial. It can look like it's not important, like what's the big deal? But if they're upset, it's upsetting to them, whether it looks important to us or not. And I think we both got to see how we can just respect what is without having to take it personally. And as you said, in that space of compassion and empathy, I settled really quickly. I think what was perhaps having me not let it lie was that there wasn't that compassion and empathy. But as soon as I felt heard, I was able to put it down.
Yes, exactly. And it was kind of uncanny. And I think in the past we would have had those moments and I would have withdrawn to my cave of self-righteousness and you would have stayed on your soapbox defending your case till the cows come home. And in this instance, it's like, I just suddenly saw that I just put myself in your shoes, and I think as a rule, well, particularly over this particular instance, I wouldn't do that. I had a habit of judgment around your intensity.
And I think you're right that defending my case is not a very good way, but the best way that I could in the moment. To think of to try and feel heard.
That's right.
And so if I'm able to better express that I'm needing to have my disappointment validated, and it's not really, because I think you were taking it as blaming you, but really I just wanted to not be alone with my disappointment.
Yeah, isn't it interesting? Because I think that I can sort of go through the motions of apologizing. I think people will go through the emotions of apologizing. But if the feeling or sentiment is not behind it, and the feeling that needs to be registered around that apology is compassion and empathy. And I was probably guilty of this in the past, where I would go through the motions of apologizing, and you would never stop going on. It's like, what do you want from me? Do you expect me to self-flagellate? What do I have to do to get this across that I'm sorry? But it was the sentiment that was behind the sorry that wasn't working, which is why you would go on and on.
Well, because I'd want to be heard.
So you weren't heard. For me, it's like, here's my apology. Right, can we go? Can we move on now? It's like, that's my get out of jail card, and that just doesn't work. It has to be a place of compassion, genuine compassion. And I got there just purely by the fact, here you are. Here's some space. But in that space, well, what am I going to do with this space? I know what, I'll put myself in her shoes. And lo and behold, that led to understanding.
Well, now you know how to have me put it down, how to let it lie. Right. Just a little empathy goes a long way.
It does.
Well, we hope our silly antics over TV shows, you can see the bigger point in that, and that hopefully it's helpful in terms of being able to see that when someone's upset, one of the most important things that they're looking for, like I was in that situation, was simply to have my upset heard. Even if it wasn't agreed with, like you didn't need to be disappointed that we watched the show out of order, but to just understand that I was disappointed because now I knew what was going to happen and I was going to watch the other episode knowing what was going to happen to this character, and I didn't like that.
You didn't like that.
All right, well, have a good weekend.
Have a great weekend.